Today, we have several more details to share with you guys in the case of Riley Strain, because just yesterday, News Nation released an interview with anchor Brian Enton, who spoke to Riley Strain's family about more details in this investigation. Now, present for this interview was Riley Strain's mother, his father, as well as both of his step-parents. Now, initially, just prior to this full interview being released, we had a small portion from it. And during that small portion, Riley Strain's mother talked about a conversation that she had with Riley on the night of his disappearance. This conversation was a text message conversation, and it surrounded a drink that Riley was consuming on that night at one of the bars that he visited. Riley told his mother that the drink did not taste good, and it also tasted like barbecue. We learned that the drink that Riley Strain was consuming was in fact a rum and coke. This, of course, alarmed Riley Strain's mother, where she told him he should probably not continue to consume the drink. And again, we do not have the exact bar in which this took place, but now from this latest interview, we do have a more detailed timeline of places Riley visited that night, which was not only Luke Bryan's bar, but several other celebrity-based bars down on Lower Broadway. This information is coming from bank records that the family has now been able to access. In addition to this information, Riley Strain's family also went way more into detail about that night of Riley Strain's disappearance and their arrival into Nashville, as well as what they consider to be an appalling interaction with Riley Strain's fraternity brothers on that night. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at all of the new information that we have learned from this interview. Very interesting stuff here. So first, real quick, before we get into what Riley's family had to share about that night of the events that transpired following their arrival in Nashville, here is a tweet by News Nation's anchor Brian Enton. This is a graphic that you're seeing of the bars in which Riley visited on that night, particularly in order as well. Again, the family now has access to the bank records, and this is where this information is coming from. If you can see here, the first bar that Riley attended that night was Miranda Lambert's bar, Casa Rosa. They later went down the road to Garth Brooks' bar. These are all in very close proximity, which we know Garth Brooks' bar just opened up. That's Friends in Low Places. Following being at Garth's new bar, they then went to Kid Rock's, which, if you're familiar with Nashville, is closer towards the end of Lower Broadway. And then after visiting Kid Rock's, they then end up at Luke Bryan's bar, and Luke Bryan's bar was the last stop. Now, what is interesting about Luke Bryan's bar, other than it being the last stop that Riley made on the night of his disappearance, and we're going to get to this in just a moment because it's within this interview that we're going to break down from News Nation. Riley Strain did not spend a large amount of time in Luke Bryan's bar. And because of that, we're going to hear why the family sort of has questions surrounding the time frame. So now let's go ahead and jump to the interview with News Nation. In the interview, Riley Strain's stepfather told Brian Enton, "It's interesting because he was not in Luke Bryan's as long as we thought. You know, according to what the detectives told us, timeline this week, he left Garth's and went to Kid Rock's and then spent an hour in Kid Rock's, then showed up at Luke Bryan's at 9:15, I believe is what the detective told us. He was in Luke Bryan's from 9:15 to 9:36. 21 minutes. He had one beer, 2 waters. You know, last time I checked, every time you go into these bars, you have to show ID, probably have to pay a cover. So he didn't meet the protocol to be in there after being in there for 21 minutes. I can't imagine a lot changed in that 21 minutes from when he was paying to get in." The family then made it clear that this is now a mission and they are not going to stop holding interviews and looking for answers until they receive the answers that they're looking for. Now, after discussing where Riley was on that night and the different bars that Riley had visited, as well as the drink that his mother asked him to not continue to consume, the rum and coke in which Riley said tasted like barbecue, they then went into what happened, the timeline of events of when they finally arrived in Nashville on the night of Riley's disappearance, as well as what their interaction was like with Riley Strain's group of friends, his fraternity brothers, when they got there. Brian Enton first asked Riley's mother about the idea of the fraternity brothers not going to the police by the time they reached out to her on that night after Riley's disappearance, to which Riley's mom replied, "Not that I'm aware of." Brian Enton then asked, "Were you surprised?" Riley's mom answered back and said, "Yes, because why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they have called the police when they got back at 3:15 in the morning and didn't see him then? Why wouldn't they have called the police? I don't know." News anchor Brian Enton then mentioned that it was 7 or 8 hours that had gone by until Riley's group reached out to his mom and asked did she have any answers as to why maybe they did not call the police. Riley's mom stated, "I don't know. I don't know." Now, Riley's stepfather then chimed in and added, "We called them on the way down, and it was probably close to 12 o'clock, and they were just going to the sheriff's detention center, to the sheriff's office, to report him missing, and that was probably 12:15 to 12:30, somewhere in there." Riley's mom then jumped back in, stating that it was a total of 14 hours after his last ping of where his phone was. The family was then asked what happened when they finally arrived in Nashville. Riley's mom said, "So when we got there, all the boys were out. Well, not all the boys, but several of the boys were out front with the police officer, and we had to finish filling out the report. So we completed that, and the boys stayed out for a while, and then they all of a sudden disappeared. All of the boys. And they ended up back out a little while later in their dress clothes to go out to their formal that night," which, as we already knew, Riley Strain and his fraternity brothers, the reason they were in Nashville was for the formal. Brian Enton clarified this by asking, "They went to the formal?" To which the family all replied yes, nodding their heads. Enton then asked, "These are his fraternity brothers," and Riley's father added, "Fraternity brothers, roommates, friends from high school?" Riley's stepfather then added, "We spent the next 4.5 hours searching every emergency rooms to see if he was in the hospital. And we come back, and they're coming back, some of them from the party, and they're waving at us sitting in the truck. How does that make you feel?" Brian Enton then mentioned that he would have imagined the brothers banding together as a search group for that night, where Riley's stepdad again answered, 150, 160 of them on the ground, you know. They're from all different chapters, and, you know, they told us they would be there, all of them. They were there if we needed them. We didn't know what we needed at that point in time, but you would have thought they would have at least been out searching, trying to do something. It wasn't. When Enton followed up asking the family what were they thinking during this time, Riley's dad answered and said, "We weren't happy, to say the least. It's appalling." Now, another interesting piece of information that was brought up during this interview, News Nation's Brian Enton brings up a letter that the family had received from a patron who was staying in the same hotel in which Riley and his fraternity brothers were staying in on that night. Within this letter, this person talks about a commotion that was going on in the hallway with several individuals. To include, throughout this commotion, more individuals continued to show up throughout the night. And when asked about this letter, Riley's father clarified that he spoke to a friend prior to this interview, and the commotion in the hallway apparently was in reference to one of these individuals hurting their hand, and the loud interactions that were going on in the hallway was just a bit of emotion coming from everybody due to the injury to this person's hand. But at the conclusion of this interview, Riley's mom is fighting back the tears as she just says that she wants to be able to have a conversation. She hasn't had the opportunity yet to have a conversation with Riley Strain's fraternity brothers about this particular night, for them to be able to share their whole story and what went down on this evening. And for anyone who has to go through such a heartbreaking and tragic event, family, friend, whoever that it may be, Riley's mom makes it clear that she still has a hole in her heart, which rightfully so. And again, the family is not looking to slow down on this investigation, and they are going to continue to push forward until these answers and concerns are addressed. As always, guys, that's your latest update here from CountryCast. Be sure to subscribe down below so you never miss out on any breaking news and updates.